My name is Megan Henshaw, and this is my thesis presentation. The name of my thesis paper is The Need for Factorial Design, Longitudinal Design, and Clinical Trials in Gut-Brain Axis and Psychobiotic Research. My supervisor was Dr. R. Dennis Soignier. A quick overview of what we'll be talking about in this paper. I'll have a brief introduction and then get into the topics of psychotropic drugs, increased research of the microbiome, gut-brain axis, probiotics, psychobiotics, research techniques, methods, conclusions, and finally the discussion and future implications. For many years, the focus of psychology has been on brain chemistry and neurons, specifically looking at particular neurotransmitters and how they relate to mental disorders and disease. Eli Metchnikoff, however, was a famous immunologist in the late 1800s, and towards the end of his career suggested that gut health could actually affect mental health. He specifically suggested that consuming yogurt, which contains different kinds of probiotics, could reduce the symptoms of melancholia. He was mostly written off as crazy and senile, as these ideas just seemed really out there for the time. But recently there's been shifts in research that particular researchers such as Dr. John Cryon and Ted Dinan out of the University College Cork have reopened his work and recognized that there is a strong connection between the brain and the gut, and that it could have severe implications for mental health. More research must be done in order to release scientifically backed alternatives. Specifically, we need to narrow down which probiotics and probiotic combinations are most effective for particular mental disorders and how well their effects last long term. Psychotropic drugs were initially discovered by Henry Labourette, who was a physician during a war and was prescribing promethazine for its antihistamine effects. What he discovered, though, when he was giving these different soldiers this antihistamine of promethazine, is that it also created a euphoric effect. The patients who received it were more subdued and a little more easy to work with, like they just kind of did what they were told for the most part. And what he realized when he saw this was that it could have implications in psychiatric practice, particularly for those who suffer severe psychotic episodes, such as some forms of schizophrenia and things of that nature. So in the 1950s, promethazine was introduced as a neuroleptic in psychiatric practice. Later on, though, the term neuroleptic was changed to antipsychotic, and as Moncrief 2013 discusses, there didn't seem to be a lot of scientific reason for changing this name, and the change of this name does have major implications, as neuroleptic is descriptive of what it initially was suggested to do and used for, of just kind of mellowing out patients so that they wouldn't need to be restrained physically as often and things of that nature, whereas antipsychotic suggests that it is directly treating the disorder, just like antiviral and antibacterial and antivenom and things like that convey that they are actually directly attacking the thing that we're meaning to treat. Psychotropic drugs have been and are very helpful to many people, but they don't seem to be addressing the root cause. There's been much research that suggests that we may just be doing symptom control currently. As I said, they are still extremely helpful and one of our best treatments that we have currently for disorders such as depression, anxiety, and schizophrenia, but other areas need to be looked at in order to help us find exactly what the root cause is of these disorders, so that hopefully we can find permanent help for many people who suffer with these disorders lifelong. There has been increased research in the microbiome, and it has become increasingly apparent that the microbiome is important for understanding human health in all kinds of areas. Some of the diseases that are connected with the microbiome are diseases such as Crohn's disease, Alzheimer's, irritable bowel syndrome, and many others. The microbiome is defined as all of the microorganisms living and working within the human body. This includes eukaryotes, archaea, bacteria, and viruses. The microbiome isn't confined to just one area in our body. It's not just in the colon or just in the gut or anything like that. They're actually, microorganisms live all throughout our body, but they are most concentrated within the GI tract and the colon. Humans co-evolved with the microbiome, which has made it integral for healthy human functioning and homeostasis. Just like many animals grew up alongside each other, and if one of them goes extinct or is having issues, the other ones also do, we seem to rely on these microbes for our human health to thrive. Clark et al. 2011 looked at the effects of lactic acid bacteria on irritable bowel syndrome. They looked at several studies and found that receiving the LAB some of the included improvements included a decrease in abdominal pain and discomfort, and that it just overall helped with the disorder and had significant results in general. This is just one example of the many ways that different probiotics can help individuals with many physical illnesses. The gut-brain axis is the bidirectional connection between the mind and the gut. It communicates both ways and can have effects both ways. Mental health can have an effect on GI disorders and vice versa. This section will focus on what is known about the gut-brain axis and examples of studies that show some of the implications that it has. In this infographic here, I took from Psychobiotics 2018. It kind of shows a little bit of what I'm going to be talking about with the neurotransmitters and the different hormones and things like that that communicate both ways between the gut and the brain. I don't have time to fully get into everything that I would like to, but if you look into the papers that I have cited in the bottom left-hand corner of this slide, they discuss more fully this connection between the gut and the mind. The main communication pathways are the central nervous system, endocrine system, and immune system. So our body, from the gut to the brain, is communicating with each other through neurons and hormones and just all kinds of different cells, and we're discovering more and more ways how it's communicating. And it still isn't fully understood, but what we do know is quite incredible. In a study by Kelly et al., they inflicted depression-like symptoms onto rats by transferring the fecal matter of depressed humans into the rats. For the placebo, they took the fecal matter of healthy patients and put it into the rats, and the placebo had no change. So it was significant results, and I find this study particularly intriguing because it shows a direct cause and effect relationship between the microbes in this fecal matter causing depression in these rats. Irritable bowel syndrome has been shown to improve after cognitive behavioral interventions and even meditation. So again, showing direct cause and effect relationships that they have been able to help irritable bowel syndrome not only through the more typical ways that are known treatments for it, but also through improving mental health, and that had an effect on that disorder. In Psychobiotics 2018, they discuss how the Mediterranean diet can be beneficial for the microbiome, and in psychological health through the gut-brain axis. So they had two different groups. One was put on a Mediterranean diet, which consists mostly of fresh fruits, vegetables, meats, and fermented foods. And then the other one was based more off of the Western diet of a lot of processed foods and things that are typically eaten in places like America and the UK. They did show extreme improvement on those put on the Mediterranean diet, and the results were very intriguing. In Bursick et al., they caused gastrointestinal inflammation in mice, which in turn created anxiety-like symptoms. So like in Kelly et al., it's showing how inflicting damage to the health of the gut can actually have an effect on mental disorders. In Bursick, they caused these anxiety symptoms, and in Kelly et al., they caused depression-type symptoms using slightly different methods. In Liu et al. 2019, they measured the effect of the probiotic Lactobacillus plantarum on anxiety, stress, and memory in human adults, and they did have significant results. Other similar studies have been done by Marotta et al. And others to show the effects of probiotics on particular mental measures. Holden et al. Wanted to determine a cause and effect relationship for how the brain can affect the gut. They inflicted artificial strokes on mice via surgical techniques. They had two separate control groups, one that only received the anesthesia and one that received a surgery but without causing the strokes. Both the surgery group and the artificial stroke groups suffered negative effects on gut health, but the strokes group had a significantly larger effect on gut health than did the other two groups. probiotics, you've heard me tossing this word around and you may or may not know what they are, but probiotics are classified as bacteria that are have health benefits for human health. They can be given in supplement form or received through our diet and foods. They colonize the GI tract and have been shown to have positive effects on GI health. The first probiotic to be isolated and prescribed was Bifidobacteria, and this was done by Henry Chissier in 1899. He took the bacteria from infants who had been being breastfed and prescribed it for those who were unable to be breastfed. As we are discovering more and more, infants in their early stages of life, through coming out of the birth canal and also through breast milk from their mothers, receive a lot of the microbiome that is good for protecting them. As I mentioned earlier, Eli Metchnikoff was likely the first to directly say that beneficial microbes, aka probiotics, could improve mental health. There are now labs all over the world researching the implications of probiotics on the gut-brain axis in Italy, China, Chicago, other places in the US, of course, as I mentioned, Cork, Ireland, and many other labs within the UK. More controlled double-blind factorial studies need to be done in order to narrow down which probiotics are most effective in the treatment of psychological disorders. One study by Silvey et al. Found that significant results in both food and supplement administration of probiotics on gastrointestinal health, but there was no significant difference between the groups. So they were directly trying to affect gastrointestinal health, not mental health here. But what's interesting about this study is that the probiotic supplements seem to not have a significant difference over the diet changes or vice versa. Typically, when we're looking at supplements versus diet, the changing to a healthy diet tends to be shown to have a greater effect than just receiving it via supplementation. What has been shown is how change in diet increases the effectiveness of supplemental probiotics in the case of mental health. In Kalika et al., they did a factorial design study where they compared the effects of probiotics via oral suspension, dietary changes, and both the psychobiotic blend and dietary changes on anxiety. What this study showed is that the dietary changes alone did not have significant effects on anxiety, but when you combine the dietary changes with the probiotics via oral suspension, it had an even greater effect than the probiotics alone. Psychobiotics are certain probiotics that cause improved mental health. So as I was talking about John Cryan and Ted Dinan earlier, they wrote a book alongside Scott Anderson called The Psychobiotic Revolution. This was one of the books that first got me interested in this topic, and very well discusses the research up to date of when it was published. Psychobiotics are probiotics and prebiotics that positively affect psychological health, and the effects of certain probiotics have been studied on different areas of mental health, but more research still needs to be done to determine which probiotics are the most effective and which blends of probiotics and prebiotics can be the best form of psychobiotic for particular mental disorders such as depression and anxiety. In Yang et al., they did an experiment on rats in order to see if prebiotics could decrease surgery-induced neuroinflammation and redress post-operative cognitive dysfunction. They had significant results with the prebiotics alone, and this further supports that prebiotics should also be considered as probiotics, as they can have an effect on mental health. Prebiotics are particular things such as fiber, certain kinds of fiber and such, that the probiotics actually feed on. Like, prebiotics are hard to digest within our own digestive tract, and then they make it down to where larger colonies of probiotics are, and they actually flourish when those prebiotics are present. Akayesh et al. 2016 is one of the few clinical studies in the effects of probiotics on major depressive disorder. So, as I may have mentioned already, clinical studies still need to be done, but Akayesh et al. Is one who has started that. They measured the effects of the probiotics on people who actually clinically were diagnosed with major depressive disorder, which as of right now, studies like that are lacking. This study was done with depression, but we also need to be doing studies like this with anxiety and other disorders that we think may be affected by Psychobiotics. Not all research is created equal. Different kinds of studies are able to uncover different things with varying levels of validity and statistical power. Misra in 2012 discusses how randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled studies are often considered the golden standard. This is because the sample is collected randomly, people are randomly assigned to groups, and the researcher that is giving the treatment and or measuring the effects of the treatment through surveys and whatnot are unaware of which group the participant is, as well as the participant being unaware of which group they're in. It's important that participants are unaware of which group they're in so that the placebo effect is not what we're actually measuring, and that we're actually measuring the effect of the treatment. It's also important that the researcher is unaware of which group they're in, because even if the researcher doesn't tell the participant with their words, they can tell them with the way in which they're acting, or how they basically they can just project their assumptions of how things will go in subtler ways, as a lot of communication can go below that of just speaking out loud. Many studies have been done to this level of randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled studies, but many more need to be done that incorporate factorial design, longitudinal design, and also neuroscientific methods. Factorial design is when you take several different treatments and actually measure them separately, but then also together. So in the case of what I'm suggesting here is that we take different probiotics and or prebiotics and measure them on the effects of depression and anxiety both separately and then together within the same experiment, because then it is easier to understand which probiotics had the best effect or which ones together in different combinations have the most powerful compounded effect. Karun et al. Describes the benefits and challenges of longitudinal studies. Longitudinal studies are important in that they measure long-term what the effects of particular treatments can be and how reoccurrences of the disorder can come up, and if there may be side effects that we're unaware of early on that pop up later, as is the case with many medicines that we don't have the chance to see until they've been in use for many years or a longitudinal study has been done. Longitudinal studies can obviously be difficult as they do take place over a large span of time, and it can be sometimes difficult to get the participants back to be tested or measured or check back in with the researchers. More neuroscientific measures should be used in gut-brain axis research in order to more fully understand the communication mechanisms, because we don't fully understand these mechanisms. So neuroscientific measurements such as fMRI and things like that can actually measure the activity of the brain and hopefully help us to more fully understand how the communication is happening once those signals have been sent up to the brain, like how it directly affects the neurotransmitters. Is this treatment for depression actually working very similar to an SSRI, where it's a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor just via the gut first? Like, is it our body fixing it that way, or is it doing something completely different? We don't fully understand these things yet, so more research definitely needs to be done. Methods for the study, I used many different search engines and words that are all listed here for finding the best literature to discuss these topics. The literature review process happened over the span of about 5 months, but a lot of the papers were found more recently in the last 5 weeks or so, as I had to switch topics for my thesis due to being unable to finish my experiment because of COVID-19. So a lot of the research, about 1/4 of the studies in my paper have been found more recently, but the research process has spanned over the last 5 months. Although a lot of research has been done on the gut-brain axis and psychobiotics, very few trials have been done with clinically diagnosed patients, factorial design or longitudinal design. Few side effects have been associated with probiotics, which isn't to say that there couldn't be more, and we should keep looking for them. But this could be a major breakthrough if the right combination is found to treat depression and anxiety at a level close to or better than psychotropic drugs. There are possibly more psychological disorders that are directly affected by the gut-brain axis, and only further research will reveal this information. It is paramount that future research helps to shed light on which probiotics are the most powerful for each particular disorder and if the effects last long term. Ideal studies going forward would incorporate much of what has already been done in studies such as Marotta et al. 2019 and Akesha 2016. I've already discussed the Akesha study. In Marotta et al., they not only measured things using a typical depression and mood anxiety index, but they also measured symptoms of depression such as sleep quality and things of that nature to see if they were affected by the probiotics, and they did have significant results. Aspects of the aforementioned studies should be incorporated into future research, but we'll also need to incorporate factorial design and longitudinal design moving forward based on the things that I discussed above. In order to more fully understand the effects that psychobiotics have on the mind, an experimental study could be done giving probiotics to people with depression and measure the depression as well as changes in brain activity. One way that this could be done is using something such as an fMRI to measure emotional reactions to videos that would be associated with causing sadness or happiness or joy and whatnot, and measuring that both before and after the psychobiotic treatment. Just as this discovery of psychotropic drugs was a turning point in the treatment of individuals with mental illness, I believe we have reached another major turning point in the psychological treatment of disorders. I look forward to being a part of this research going forward, and I hope we can shed light on these disorders and find more answers for people that are suffering with these daily. These are my references. Feel free to pause in order to see them more clearly. And my last request would just be that you please ask questions and make comments in the comment section. Thank you so much for watching my thesis presentation, and I hope that this video was informational for you and helped you to learn something about this topic. Thank you so much for watching.